Well, hello everyone. I honestly can't quite believe we're here in this building for many reasons. First off, we have a building and we have a museum in it. Secondly, it looks completely different to what it did a week ago, which is a huge help. We've had an amazing team of volunteers who've come and spent basically a solid week working on this project. We've had an even bigger number of people who have donated and supported so we can actually get this to where it is today. It's by no means the final result. It will continue being developed as we go, and hopefully today you'll get a bit of an idea of the potential of this place and where we are, where our vision is as to where it will go in the future. We have a total of about 75 people booked in today. They're not all turning up at the same time. People will flit in and out. We do have a full day program, so we have got stuff going on the whole day, but don't feel obliged to stay. We have got breaks throughout the day and people can go and have a browse downstairs or whatever. This is roughly what we're looking at in terms of our schedule. I'm doing a sort of a short welcome now, and we'll be introducing Diane in just a second. John Mackay has got a presentation. The good news is that I had allocated about half an hour to John's presentation because we know what John's like. It turns out he sent me through. He was supposed to be zooming in live to do a presentation. Unfortunately, he's on the road, so he can't do that. So he sent me through a video, and it's 10 minutes long. So it's significantly shorter than I was expecting, but that's fine. It's still a really fascinating look at a bit of the history of creation research, as well as a history of the Christian heritage of museums around the world. After we've done that, basically we're going to, depending on how many people we have at that point, we're going to split into two groups. Diane Eager and Josh, where's Josh? Up the back there. One of our helpers is going to take one group downstairs and have a look at some of the fossils and displays and exhibits downstairs, while I'm going to take a group upstairs around up here and discuss some of the stuff that we have up here. Then we'll have a break for lunch. There was obviously refreshments at that point as well, but hopefully you've brought a packed lunch with you, or there's plenty of places you can get food from around here. So we'll have a bit of a break for lunch and just have a bit of a chance to chat and have a wander around yourself and see what you can find. And then basically after lunch, those groups will swap over for another look around. To finish up the evening or the afternoon, Diane is going to give us a run through some of the other museum projects that we have around the world. Diane, do you want to just introduce yourself and a bit about your role at Creation Research? Because you've been here a little while now.
Yes, I have been here for a while. I came to the UK to go to the Fossil Conference down on the south coast. That was wonderful. And then I've been back here helping with the preparation for this with our marvellous team of volunteers. They really have been absolutely brilliant. So yes, I live in Australia and I work for Creation Research. I do a lot of the background research and writing for our newsletters and for our presentations, and I also give lectures on biological topics.
Yeah. You're also going to be running down through some of the research things that we've done in our museums, a bit more about the background to the museum, some of the stuff about Jurassic Ark and stuff like that as well, aren't you?
Yes, yes. If you get any of our literature or read our websites, you will have heard of our Jurassic Ark site, so I'm going to give you a run through Jurassic Ark.
No, it'll be good. I'm looking forward to it. And then finally, we're going to finish off with, we may have another break at some point in there, depending on how we're all going, and get some more tea and coffee. But basically, we're going to finish the day off with a shorter sort of discussion with me. And also, we've got a video from Sam, who's one of our young workers, who's coming in to help us and look at some of the future projects, both with the documentaries, the DVDs, future conventions, obviously the museum and all of that, and get the bit of the big vision going forward. Throughout the day, you will hopefully get a bit of a bigger idea as to what we're trying to do here at the museum, not just as a museum, but also a facility for Christians and for non-Christians, a place which is evangelistic, as well as something that is it helps with discipleship as well. And so if you want to support or feel led to support, you will find that there is details about the Creation Research Trust on your seats. Creation Research Trust is our main legal group in the UK who is a charity, looks after a lot of the finances, and is able to, they're fully committed to supporting me, John, Diane, the museum project and everything like that in the UK. So that's the best way of being able to actually support. We have two of our trustees here today, and I'll get them I'll point them out to you a little bit later as we carry on with the discussions. All right, very quickly, I've got one last little thing to show you before we have a look at what John's been sending us. So here is a picture taken about 10 years ago. It's a picture of John there. You'll probably recognize him, and a very young me. I was 16 years old. I just finished home education. I had just started a university degree, a bachelor's in science. And I really felt led and called to some kind of ministry. Didn't know when, didn't know how, didn't know even really why. Had a very troubling time for a few months. Stressing about what I was going to do or try and do. In fact, this was actually just before I started my degree, because a very blessed brother came on board and basically took me aside and said, look, if you're really called to this ministry, if this is really from God, then why are you struggling on your own? Why are you trying to do it by yourself? Surely if this is from God, he'll provide the way. You just actually need to make sure you're following Christ. Because at the time I was a Christian, but I wasn't doing the things that a Christian should do. I wasn't following Christ. I wasn't praying every day. I wasn't reading the Bible. I was just kind of plodding along. So no wonder I was in a bit of a stress. And so I ended up starting to get my life back on track. Started actually following and praying and listening to God. And as a result of that, in about 3 months, I had started a university program, been offered a placement at university. I'd been given my first job, which was that as a zookeeper, because I needed to pay for university. And I met this guy here, John. And we'd started putting things on display in our house. We had a little extension built off the side of our house, which was supposed to be a kind of homeschool learning room type thing, right? And it very quickly ended up being the fossil storage area. I've been told by my wife that I must keep all fossil storage areas to this building now and not any part of the house. But there we go. We'd started putting stuff on display. As you can see behind us, we've just started piling up fossils and artifacts and gems and also, and inviting people around, local people from our church, inviting people around and actually discussing things. And our first real major fossil that we ended up getting was this one. It's a crocodile skull. In fact, you can actually see the crocodile skull just over it, still at the back there. It's the very same one. And I thought this was fantastic. Wrote a great big article about it, put it up on our website, which was very basic back then. Still is not hugely basic, but I was ready to take on the world with this little teeny tiny museum. And when I met John, one thing that became very evident is we both had the same thoughts as regards to what the future of creation museums and creation research museums in the UK should look like. We're not talking about a great big Hollywood style, Ken Ham style museum. We're talking about something that is a facility for Christians and non-Christians. It's a place to spread the good news of Jesus Christ, and it's a place to disciple people. It's a place where the Bible comes to life. It's a place where people can come and actively engage in research and get up close and personal with real artifacts, with real fossils, with real things. And as Diane will tell you, God is the God of the real world, and so we want to make sure that there's a part of that real world that reflects God's nature, because God has stamped his nature into all of creation, as it says in the book of Romans. And very shortly after, I ended up doing this, giving my first ever talk with John Mackay at a homeschool group. Few people there. I was nervous as anything, but I got through it. And then a few days later, we led our first field trip to Hunstanton. And I've been leading a field trip to Hunstanton every single year, bar COVID years, ever since. And things began to grow, and we began to redesign the museum, get some bigger fossils. We ended up calling it the Genesis Museum of Creation. And eventually it became the Genesis Museum of Creation Research. And that is still what we're kind of calling this little part of the museum upstairs. The Creation Research Centre is much bigger than just a museum. And we push these things, some Bible verses. The works of the Lord are great, studied by all who have pleasure in them. We want to study the works of the Lord, and the works of the Lord is not just a salvation, it's also his creation. And we do this, we study these works so that people may see and know, may consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this the Holy One of Israel has created it. We want people to realize that it's Jesus Christ who is the creator. And finally, a fun little verse, Psalm 148, verse 7. If you open up your King James Version, it says, "Praise the Lord from the earth, you dragons." And yes, we can talk about dragons and dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff, but we want to make sure that everything that's inside this building praises the Lord, points towards Jesus Christ. Well, we'll talk a little bit later about our future vision. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're wanting this place to be, and obviously a lot more about the actual fossils and artifacts. But for now, let's play a video by John Mackay, a short little video, about 10 minutes long, giving you a bit of background to creation research, as well as to the history, the Christian heritage of museums around the world.
G'day from the creation guy John Mackay down under on this very special event up over. It's really a project that began some 40 years ago when the Lord first called me to England, and I began collecting and filling up friendly people by the way, filling up their basements and their attics and using church storerooms. And now you've got a museum. Young Joseph the Lord has raised up, and he's heading up the project. And thank you to Joe and to all the folks over there who's jumped in and they're helping him. My job is to give you a little bit of background on museums and their importance. I guess I better start at a personal level, but it's to do with this DVD, The World of Living Fossils. Now, this is the oldest video. You'll see a very young John Mackay there. Not John Mackay, the fossil guy, but John Mackay, a young, very enthusiastic geologist who's convinced by fossils. Living fossils. You see this fossil here? A beautiful specimen I got in Germany. It's actually a cycad. And we know that because, you see, I brought it home from Germany and I went and I got a cycad in my backyard, put the two together, and you can see the cycads are still producing their own kind. Now, that's the point at which, when I became aware of that, I ceased being an evolutionist, swapped over quite a few years later to believing literal creation. The history and the importance? Well, I got a call from an American geologist who spoke in a very broad Tennessee accent, and he said, "John, we need something to give a geologist in South America." And the background, because I can't keep mimicking that all the time, the background was a missionary had contacted him and said, "I've been witnessing to this young geologist doing his PhD, and I can't get through to him. We can't get past page 1 in Genesis. He's stuck with evolution. Help." So help came from South America to Tennessee to Australia, and we said, let's pray, let's send, let's give him the DVD. Now, to cut a long story short, that young man who graduated with his doctorate became a Christian as a result, and ended up being an open door into universities in England. And it ended up with me finding out some very interesting things about museums and the history. I mean, in geology, and I'm sure you can see these fossils in the hall tonight. Look at what they're there. Look at some of the explanations. They're fantastic. But this is one I first came across because Nicholas Steno had recognised that if it looks like a shark's teeth, it's probably a shark's tooth. Now, you say that's such an obvious thing, but it's not in a world governed by pagan, Greek, metaphysical concepts. They didn't believe sharks' teeth were actually fossils, and neither did most of the church leaders at the time. The church leaders did what they often do, swallow the most popular philosophy. So there was no point in having a fossil museum, because you didn't believe they were anything apart from tricks played by the gods. But Nicholas Steno put an end to that. But following him, a young man then by the name of John Woodward, who wrote a book on Towards a Natural History of the Earth. Now, John Woodward was a Christian, there's no doubt about it, but he's your first professor of geology in Cambridge. Okay, my connection? Well, you see, this young geologist from South America had invited me to England. I got to know other geologists, and one of them had said, listen, you'd be interested in seeing all of the collection of John Woodward. He left a little note in his will saying that if you want to see these, John Woodward, Nicholas Steno is 1659, John Woodward is 1695. That's how I remember them, nice and easy. And so John Woodward's collection was available to anybody who asked to see it. So yours truly, Australians, you know, being polite and all of that, we're pretty blunt actually, said, can I go and see it? So I got to see John Woodward's original collection, bequeathed to Cambridge University, became a museum. And if you read his book, Towards a Natural History, a Natural Theory of the Earth, it is biblical creation. It is Noah's flood. It is catastrophic geology producing the fossils and preserving them, because you see, this fossil had to be buried quickly or it'd simply rot and decay. The same is true for beautiful fossils like this. That fossil fern had to be quickly buried. That fossil fern had to be preserved really fast. So John Woodward, who took up Stomastino's ideas, was actually the most influential person in the history of geology in England. It got to be a firm basis that you could believe in creation, you could believe in Noah's flood, and it showed in the rocks. But he set aside a bequest and it became a museum. If you want to see it, by the way, it's now stored in the Sedgwick Museum. It's still there, it's still got that proviso. Okay, now why does that matter? Because if you have a look at the biggest museum in the world, basically the one set up in London, the man who ran it, he set it up to show the glory of God in creation. The Bible verses that are there, the pictures, it was set up to honour the God who created all things. Richard Owen also invented the word dinosaur. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, he was convinced dinosaurs were the monsters God made. So the museum movement that really comes out of England, which we are now a long-term part of, actually began with a biblical basis, a creation basis, a creator basis, and a Noah's flood basis. Now, we don't apologise, that's what this new museum has a basis in. But you see, the influence of Sir Richard Owen spread around the world in making museums after their own kind. You go to Christchurch, and you'll see a museum with a Bible verse on the front facade there. These are his works, quoting from the book of Job. And there was an article in the ABC News here in Australia just the other day, all about how when the first evolutionist curator was appointed to our Sydney Natural History Museum, who was a special friend of Charles Darwin, he couldn't win against the creationists. So the first museums in Australia had a firm creation foundation. In fact, even my university, you walked into the science department and it had "Let There Be Light." Or you just stood out. Even if you didn't come from a church background like me, you found that you had a biblical framework in any of the display centres that were set up throughout the Western world. Okay, come closer. You see, when we have a look at the museum we're setting up tonight, I want to encourage you to get beyond young Joe in prayer, in practice, and in funding, and in personal support. Get involved, and you'll find that we're reversing the trend. Because what's happened, Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin have taken over museums. You almost need a set of blindfolds to actually see the writing that's there and blank it out, and then you need to take them off to see what the actual evidence is. Because the two things are different. Oh yes, they'll talk all about my fossil cycad, and then they'll tell you how it's evolved. But the evidence is cycads have always been cycads. They have not evolved. So we're sold a story in museums today. So can I encourage you, Joe and team, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, tell the truth. Show them exactly what fossils you find. You've got a heap of mine over there. I'm sure you'll talk to them about that. And in reality, you people who are there, pray for the museum, pray for the project. It's part of reaching out to the whole of England. People are fascinated by these displays. We run several displays here in Australia. We have Jurassic Art. We have the museum just out in Tasmania, down north of Launceston. And it's great to have unbelievers come in and say, wow, I've never seen this in my life. It's great for them to go one step further and even become a Christian. Why would that follow on? Well, for the same reason it followed on with a young geologist who was so opposed to the missionary in South America. You see, the evidence points to the glory of God as creator. That's quite a biblical position. Romans chapter 1 says the evidence is so clear, you can all see it, you can all understand it. In fact, it's so easy to follow, God will use it against a person on Judgment Day. Okay, one last thing. We have been really privileged over the years to know God's call to England, and to see it, even in COVID. Haven't been able to get over there for 3 years. Bless you all for praying for us and supporting us. But I'd like to encourage you to realise young Joe has started ministry in just about no support at all, except what's coming from Australia. Can I encourage you to realise what it costs to run some of these museums? Yes, I know you see pretty buildings all finished, but at the moment, even here in Australia, we sent Joe, £1,000 a week for the last month to get some of this underway, and he raised £4,000 just locally. Can I encourage you, get behind him, support him, in fact, support him magnificently, because our God will provide all your needs. Now, that's what Paul said to his supporters. Give generously, because our God also is watching what you do. Can I encourage you again, get behind Joe, get behind Sarah Ann, get behind Diane who's there, get behind all the people who are involved intimately in the project, pray for them and support them. Well, I pray you have a wonderful day over there on this Saturday. May God bless you and keep you, and I look forward to getting a visual report myself.
So, it gives you a little bit of a background. John's mentioned a few things there as regards to the background of the museum project, as well as he mentioned the vision of the project going forward. This is not just a museum here in Oswestry. It's not just a museum that will reach out to the local community. It's not just a museum that is in a, quite frankly, a prime location in terms of access for most of the country. Within about we are within about 3 hours drive of most of the population of the UK. We're just over 3 hours to London. We're 3.5 to 4 hours into Scotland to Glasgow. We're about an hour away from Manchester, hour and a half away from Birmingham. It's kind of as prime as you can get to get access from everywhere. But it's so much more than that. The idea is that this building will facilitate, and I keep using that word facilitate, and that's really what we see ourselves as in many ways, a facilitating ministry. But it will facilitate the presence of multiple creation discovery centres around the UK, where churches or a group of local churches can actually end up hosting a mini creation research museum, a mini display, as we send out exhibits and artefacts and things from our collection that we've put together. So there's a much, much bigger vision than what you can just see here. And the Lord has blessed us abundantly with fossils and artifacts and research opportunities. So we've got a huge amount to cover today in terms of looking around and seeing. A few very quick housekeeping things, just so you give you a bit of a perspective and know where you are today, before we kind of start splitting people up. Most of you, I believe, have found coffee and tea. You all know where that is? Good. As you went into the room where the coffee and tea was, you may have noticed that there's a set of steps on the left-hand side. If you need the bathroom, you go up those steps, follow the landing round, you'll see the bathroom straight in front of you. We'll leave the light on, just because it's a bit of a dull day today, and because the landing light doesn't currently work. So leave the light on even when you're finished in the toilet. Just up those steps, follow the landing round, and feel free to use the bathroom at any point that you need. We are having a lunch break, as I've mentioned. Hopefully most of you have brought packed lunch of some description. If you do need food, there's a Sainsbury's literally just over there. It's a minute, less than a minute's walk away. So go and grab food if you need food from there. But there are going to be refreshments and stuff that we're going to lay out, cakes and some nibbles and so on and so forth during the lunchtime. We are going to need to, just as a matter of practicality, split the groups up, just so because we want to give you a personal feel of the museum, of the artifacts and so on and so forth. And we're a big believer in hands-on, aren't we, Diane? So what we're going to do now, let's just get a few hands waving. Joshy up the back, do you want to come up here? So this is Josh. And he's come aboard as one of our helpers. So it's actually going to be Josh and Diane who are going to take group A or B, a group, downstairs through some of the bigger fossils, through some of the animals, through some of the dinosaur things we have down there. And obviously there's a chance, it's slightly fewer exhibits down there, so there is actually a chance to be able to have a look around the shop as well. But also give you an idea, because this is in development. So there's a research area down there, which is currently hidden out of the way, but they'll tell you about the research and some of the stuff that we're planning to do there. There is a cinema room downstairs, which is also full of stuff, and it's hidden out the way. And there's a courtyard downstairs, which is also full of, you get the picture. We had to kind of dump stuff just to try and get stuff clear as we go through this week. But they'll give you a bit of a perspective of what the future of downstairs looks like, because the downstairs really is the facilitating part of the centre. Up here is the museum part of the centre. And up here, obviously, you can see we've got most of the artefacts and the fossils, roughly, generally speaking. We've got fossils on that side, artefacts on that side, but I'll have a go at taking you around and showing you some of the displays and stuff like that. There'll be chances for questions as we go. We'll probably won't have, we're going to have a specific Q&A time and discussion time towards the end of this day, but during the tours, if you want to ask questions, I'm happy with just people raising hands and asking questions or shouting out or heckling or whatever you want to do. But don't throw rocks, yeah. Plenty of them around if you were inclined to do. But anyway, so we'll take people around and do some of the sort of discussions and stuff like that. So what I'm going to ask then, if we can have row 1, 2, 3, and row 1, 2, and 3 and 4, starting from the back forwards. If you'd like to head downstairs now, Diane and Josh will go down with you. As you're going, David, can you give us a wave? David is one of our trustees. Ed, can you give us a wave? Ed's one of our trustees as well. If you want to find out more about the trust at any point during the day, go and speak to them, but we'll talk more about the trust and the work that it does a little bit later. So 1, 2, 3 rows if you want to head downstairs, and the rest of us up here will start working our way around the museum. All right, everybody, we're just getting ready to do Diane's presentation, looking at some of the other research projects and the history of museums around the world, and it gives you a bit of a taste as to what can be done here. Some of the amazing graphics, some of the amazing 3D models, and so on and so forth. Now, John mentioned earlier about the cost of some of these things, and yes, these things cost an enormous amount to run a museum, to run a building, and to want to really make a facility like this. And John has already mentioned today as well that, for the time being anyway, most of our support is coming in internationally, as in from Australia, from the main site, right, from the main team. Well, we do have a trust here in the UK, which is committed to supporting the work of the museums and stuff like that. And we've got some of our trustees here today. But David, could you just tell us about these forms, a bit about your involvement in the trust and how people can support the museum by supporting the trust?
Yeah, thank you. I think they're fairly self-evident. You'll see if you look at the form, there is a place there for you to gift aid donations. That means if you have, if you're paying tax in Britain, we are able to recover the tax. The tax has been taken from it. Standing order part of it as well, and that's about it. It's fairly straightforward. As a trust, we've been running since 2004, so we're 19 years old now. So it's been going for some time now. We are completely voluntary. There's four trustees. There's another one over there. Wave your hand. There's 2 others, not here today, and we're all volunteers, so we take nothing out of the trust at all. We don't charge for travel expenses, although we're scattered all around the country. So what you donate to Creation Research Trust goes almost entirely to the ministry. The only minuses are the bank charges and the charges for the auditor, which is a couple £100 a year. So virtually everything that you donate will come to support and underwrite this work here. And it would be greatly appreciated if you'd like to contribute in that way. Anything else?
That's great. Thank you very much, David. So yeah, we had a big meeting when we were taking this project on, and we were discussing the future of the Creation Research Centre and where it was going to be, and the Trust has essentially agreed to support the museum project fully. So by supporting the Creation Research Trust, you are effectively running this place, you are supporting the running of this place and keeping it going and developing it further. And also, because all of creation research around the world is connected, Like I say, at the moment, almost all of our support comes in from overseas. So by supporting one of the officers, no matter where you are in the world, you are supporting all the officers and all the projects that we do. So we would be very grateful if you're able to support and help us to continue the vision that we see here, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But Diane, let's make sure your microphone's on. We need to switch the little box.
The box is here.
We need to switch it, it's just on the top. There you go.
Yes, are we on?
We are on.
We are on, isn't that good? Yes, well, I'm going to tell you about a museum that's a little bit different to what this one is, because this is a building. Jurassic Ark is actually an outdoor museum, which makes it quite unusual. In fact, it's certainly unique in Australia. I'm not sure whether it's unique in the world, but that doesn't matter. It's an outdoor museum, and we welcome people to come and see all sorts of things and learn about the God of the real world, just like we welcome people to come and see the evidence of the God of the real world in this museum here. Now, it's called Jurassic Ark because the rock layer that originally started it off with the fossils we found are classified as Jurassic, and we shouldn't be afraid of using that term because it was given originally by someone who believed the Bible, who lived in the Jura Mountains. So Jurassic means just like the Jura Mountains, and the name had nothing to do with millions of years because it was named before that idea came into existence. So Jurassic, to do with the rocks like the Jura Mountains. And the rocks like the Jura Mountains have all sorts of interesting fossils in them. Now, everyone thinks Jurassic means dinosaurs. We do have dinosaurs, like the two that you met downstairs, and they're very, very popular. But the real reason it started was because we found some fossil petrified wood. Now, this was found quite a few years ago, and by the owner of the property that this is on, who are long-term supporters of creation research. We've been very, very grateful for their support, and one of them is there on the left, and you can see John Mackay and a couple of the other regular workers. The man with the camera at the top is one of John's grandsons there, looking at these fossil logs. Now, originally it was just a few bits of petrified wood, and James, who owns the property, rang up John and said, "Oh, we've found some petrified wood. Do you want to come and have a look at it?" Well, John will go anywhere to look at fossils. And so we went up there and, "Oh, this is a good place. We can bring school groups and field trip groups, and they can pick up bits of petrified wood and take them away." And we realised, as we excavated more and more of it, that this is a much bigger thing than just a few bits of petrified wood. And some of the pieces are really enormous. This is Daryl, who looks after the site on a day-to-day basis. He's the curator, as it were, who looks after the site, takes care of the gardens and some of the other things. And this is a huge, enormous tree stump. We have since had a ground-penetrating radar scan done of the area, and there are thousands and thousands of fossil logs buried in this thing. So anyone who goes up there, you can dig up your own fossil. You can't take them away. We don't actually excavate them out. They're quite fragile. In terms, they're heavy, but they will crack if they are handled. So we're leaving them in the ground to show people the extent of this. It's like a big log jam. Now, you know the photos of log jams that you see in Canadian rivers where they fell a whole lot of trees and they float down the river and get jammed. It's just like one of those. Now think of the size of a flood you need to bury a log jam of logs that size, but thousands of them all together, masses and masses of them. And so we've been digging these up and we've been photographing. There's somebody underneath that hat photographing them. And this was one of the first ones we ever found. It's a bit weathered and now because it's been out exposed to the weather. It wasn't that sort of grey colour when we found it. But it is interesting in that all of these logs show an enormous amount of fine detail. So you can see what species of tree that they were from. And this particular one was rather good because you can see there's a branch actually forming within where the fossil has broken. And that tells you a lot about identifying trees, if you can find the pattern of tree rings and also how the branches form their angles. And so we sent a piece off to an expert in fossil trees. We thought we knew what they were. They're Araucaria pines, but we wanted that confirmed by someone who was an expert in fossil wood. And yes, they contacted it. Yes, you have fossil Araucaria pines. Now, we have fossil Araucaria pine wood in this museum, but remember, southern pine trees, Araucaria pines, they don't grow in this country now. They don't grow in Germany. When the fossil was found that we have downstairs that's got a piece of an Araucaria branch in it, but they do grow in Australia. In fact, they grow in the very area where all of these Araucaria pines were. So we thought, well, this is a good opportunity for us to make the point about how things have multiplied after their kind. These are classic living fossils. So we decided we would plant a few trees. And so here are Araucaria pine trees growing a few yards away from the fossil Araucarias, and they haven't changed one bit, in spite of the fact that this whole area is classified as Jurassic, so it's over 100 million years old. And they're still the same. And we also thought, well, there are other living fossils as well, like the ginkgo that you would have seen up the back there. Palm trees are living fossils. The Wallamai pine, you may have heard about, was quite famous. They made a big thing about it. It was found in the Blue Mountains in Australia. There is an example planted in Kew Gardens, and they got David Attenborough to plant it so they could give it a lot more publicity and promote it as being an evolutionary example, but of course it's not. It's multiplied after its kind. It's exactly the same as the ones they found growing in the Blue Mountains. And we have cycads. We were even given some cycads. Now you will have noticed that we have various things donated to us, so as well as getting support in finances, we do welcome donations of good fossils and other things. And we had cycads donated to us because there was a drought in Australia. And this nursery business couldn't sell their cycads because they're very big and slow growing, and nobody wanted them because they weren't allowed to artificially water plants. And so he rang up and he said, well, I have these cycads that I can't sell. Would you like them? You may have them for free if you can take them away. Well, we had to hire a big truck to take them away because they're huge, but they're worth thousands of dollars. So that was a huge donation. Classic living fossils, they're considered to be about 300 million years old. Haven't changed a bit. So we have our after their kind living fossil garden. And we thought, well, we could tell some more about biblical history and about the Bible by planting gardens. People love gardens. So we started off planting some gardens where it describes, well, in the beginning, God planted a garden and he made the plants and he made fruit trees and low-growing herbs and all sorts of things like that. And so we planted a little garden, and then we've gradually extended it until it's quite long and goes down to where the fossils are from that gate that I showed you the photo of. And we've planted lots of lovely things that show you. I'm sorry, is this... it seemed to be a bit echoey. Is that better? We've planted all sorts of lovely things which show God's beautiful design. Now, because it's in Queensland where you don't have any frosts, you can grow orchids outside. You don't have to have them in a glass house. And you just plant them by plonking them in trees and old tree stumps and things like that. So we have beautiful orchids growing like these. These are called crucifix orchids. They're rather beautiful, aren't they? And they have that distinctive cross shape. And so we thought, well, we can get even more out of this. Why don't we find as many examples of plants that are of the one kind? so that we can show that not only have things multiplied after their kind, but you also have variation within kind. In fact, tremendous variation, but none of that is evolution. I'm sorry. It's fine. Is it? It's all right? It just sounds awfully echoey to me. Is that better? This needs to go closer. Is that better? Yes. Now, John is also fond of a group of plants called bromeliads. Now, one bromeliad you might be familiar with is the pineapple. That's a bromeliad, but there are lots of other bromeliads, and so we gradually gathered together a whole lot of examples of different bromeliads, and this is the bromeliad kind garden. And we're going to have a few other different kind gardens as well. That's being developed. So this was our first variation within kind garden, and it's grown rather beautifully. And you have bromeliads which are this big, and you have some that are that big, and everything in between. And you have red pigmented ones and green ones, and some with long thin leaves and some with short fat ones, but they're all variations of the same kind. So we see lots of change, but none of it's evolution. These are all obviously bromeliads, and they have the same basic structure as bromeliads. So we have, after their kind, living fossils, variation within kind in gardens, and we thought, well, we try and tell the history of the world in gardens, so we just planted a nice garden to show that God, on day 3 of the creation week, he planted a garden. But the story doesn't end there, does it? Gardens changed, didn't they? And we are the only people in the world who have deliberately planted a garden of thorny plants. Most people do their best to ignore those, but we want to make a point. And so, and the point we want to make is that God did not have to add anything to plants in order to make thorns. In fact, they are a degeneration. So here are some bromeliads in the thorn garden, but some of them have spikes on them and some of them don't. In order to have those sort of spiny leaves, all that has to happen is that you have a mismatch between the internal plumbing, the leaf veins, and these leaves do have veins. They're not as obvious as they are in other leaves, but they're there. The leaf veins have hard stuff in their in the structure of the leaf veins themselves. That acts as a support for the leaf. So if you have a mismatch between the soft green tissue and the leaf veins will end up sticking out the edges, and they will form hard points, and so you've got spines. The same with thorns, like you get on a lemon tree or a hawthorn. They happen when branches and leaf bases start to grow, and then they just stop. So nothing's been added to the thorny plant. In fact, it's lost something. It's a failure of growth. So thorns and spines are just disturbances of growth, and so you can get thorny and non-thorny varieties in lots of plants. And we have a little mural there which explains that. We have these outdoor murals because we found that people don't really know their biblical history. In fact, when we planted that first garden, which was just meant to illustrate day 3 of creation, someone did ask us, well, do you have any gardens for days 1 and 2? Yes, bit of a problem, isn't it? So we thought, well, maybe we need to explain to people the days of creation, because the church doesn't teach it these days. They just ignore the whole thing. So we got the artist who works with us, who has illustrated those beautiful children's books that you will have seen downstairs. We got him to design a mural showing the 6 days, or the first 5 days of creation. Actually, we don't go quite up to the 6th day here. Now, you do have to look at this from right to left because of the place where it's placed in the garden. You come to the right-hand edge of it first before the left-hand. So if you start that end, and when we were explaining to Steve what we wanted, he read through the first 5 days, and he said, well, I'm not quite sure about the one where it says it was without form and void. That's a bit hard for an artist to draw. But anyway, he's done a lovely job of showing the creation of the heavens, the earth, the light, the land and sea, the vegetation, and then the sea creatures and the flying creatures. And the sea creatures and the flying creatures, would have been wonderful to be there on those days and see things that God had created. And is Snow still here? And I think he's downstairs. Well, he is a brilliant wildlife artist, and he drew us this beautiful mural. It's absolutely stunning. This photo doesn't do it justice. It really is a beautiful mural of the creatures that live in the sea and the creatures that fly in the air. Now notice he's also got some pterosaurs and some plesiosaurs in there. In other words, things that don't exist now, but they would have been created along with the flying things and the swimming things on the 5th day of creation. Now, once we started with these murals, we thought, well, we can extend that and tell the biblical history of the world. So, of course, we start with Adam and Eve in the garden when the world was very good. And so this is another one of Steve's pictures showing the world was very good. And notice there are dinosaurs there because they would have been created on the same time as the land animals were created on the 6th creation day. And Adam and Eve would have had no problem with having a few dinosaurs wandering through the Garden of Eden because they wouldn't have done anyone any harm. Everything was very good. Sadly, the world did not stay that way, and eventually it became corrupt, and God sent the flood. So a lot of the fossils that we have there actually illustrate the fact that the world has been deluged. It has been buried by a flood. And so we need to be able to tell that story, and the murals help us to do that and to remind people that everyone who was outside the ark didn't survive, just in the same way that everyone who doesn't put their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ won't survive the next worldwide judgment. Now, because these are all outdoors, they are actually printed on aluminium and made fairly weatherproof, but we do have them set up in frames with fold-down coverings of shade cloth, so when people aren't there visiting, those are all actually folded down so that they are protected a bit from the weather. Now, modern visualization we have gone into the digital world, and some other people we know who are experts in computer graphics said, well, we can set up a system for you where you can get some computer graphics on your phone using this system we've got, using a little app that you can download onto your phone. And you can take a photo of a visualized whatever it is you like. So in our case, it was dinosaurs. And that will be combined with the photo that you take on your phone. And so that's been a great hit. You can have your photo taken with a graphic dinosaur. This is the photo you get on your phone. Right, the school students are real, the mural in the background is real, the dinosaur there is a computer graphic, but it does make for a good photo and people enjoy that. And so we have extended that to a few other places. Another good photo opportunity we have is this, right? Do you recognize that? Right, it's a shark's jaw. It is a really, really huge, huge shark. It's a great photo opportunity. Lots of people get their photo taken with it. But we also have a computer graphic that goes with that because people have no idea how big this shark was. This is a megalodon shark, grew up to about 20 meters long. That is bigger than the biggest great white that lives today. And so the computer graphic people did design a graphic for it. And we had some fun working out where we might get people to aim their cameras when they took a photo of this, and this was one of our experiments. That's John's estate car underneath there. And it's quite a big vehicle, so this is a seriously big shark. But we now have another way of explaining about giant creatures without the need for computer graphics, so it doesn't matter if your phone signal won't work. This is a giant goanna. A goanna is a large Australian lizard, and they are much smaller than this, but in the past we know from their fossils they grew to be much bigger. And this is a mural made of the same printed aluminium as the rectangular murals, but it's very, very cleverly printed so that it does have that 3D look about it, but it is flat. And it's another wonderful photo opportunity, but it's not just for photo opportunities. We are trying to show people, look, the world used to be a better place. The fact that creatures are no longer this big should tell you that somehow in the past, the world was a much better place, and that reptiles that just couldn't survive in the harsh Australian climate could survive in those days. The world was a better place. So big creatures, megafauna, not just dinosaurs, but big other creatures are a good example of how the world is going downhill. Again, lots of change, but no evolution. And it's good for people to be able to see that and experience it, even if it is just with a flat piece of printed aluminium. It makes it very memorable if people can actually do it, hold it, see it for themselves, which is why it's important that we do have a museum that people can come to rather than just seeing things online. We were grateful for the online things that we could do during the restrictions. But we really like to have people to come and see Jurassic Ark, and we have open days at Jurassic Ark, just like we have open days here. And this was from one of our open days, and you can see a whole lot of people looking at one of our experiments. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But down in the bottom right-hand corner is a fabulous fossil that was given to us by this bearded gentleman here. And you can see it being mounted in the there. It was interesting. This is a fossil that was donated to us by Joe Taylor, who lives in Texas. And it was actually cheaper for Joe Taylor to fly with this thing in its package as part of his luggage than for it to be sent by courier. So I had to go and meet him at Sydney Airport and then fly to Brisbane with him. But it was really good to meet Joe Taylor. He is a real character, a wonderful supporter of our work, and a brilliant fossil collection and a collector, and a brilliant artist who actually mounts and displays these fossils. So we're very, very grateful to have him. And here he is speaking at the open day. This is a cast of that same fossil that's actually inside that they were mounting inside there. The funniest thing I remember from that open day was people were allowed to ask questions, and someone asked a question about apes turning into people, which I answered. And then Joe said, oh, look, can I make a few points? And so I gave him the microphone. And he said, you have to realize that apes are smarter than people, and they would not evolve into people, because if you can live in a tree and eat fruit for nothing and just loaf around all day, you're not going to evolve into people who have to be ruled by governments and pay tax. He comes from Texas. He's a wild man of the woods, and so you can imagine what he thinks of bureaucracy and governments and paying tax. But a lovely man and a great benefactor to creation research. And we like to show people the gardens. We like to show them the brilliant design. We like to show them the evidence for creation and for degeneration. This is a homeschooling family. We love to help homeschoolers. We like to have homeschool groups come to Jurassic Ark. And so if you are involved in homeschooling, we'd really love to help you in whatever way we can. And these family are looking at one of our really strange plants. We like weird plants. We love weird plants because they are some of the best examples of God's brilliant design, and also the fact that God has a sense of humour. Everyone thinks that God is a sort of doer-grump. No, he's not. God has a wonderful sense of humour. Why else would he create a plant that has flowers on its roots? Which it does, right? Yeah, it's a type of orchid. It grows in South America, but it will also grow in Queensland. So we like to cultivate these and show them to people. And the other thing we like to do is we like to do experiments. Now, here's a simple experiment that you can actually do yourself, and we do this regularly when the visitors come. This is just to illustrate how you can form polystrate trees. So it's just a big tank full of water, and you put some sticks in it and just leave them there, right? Very easy to do. And eventually the sticks start absorbing the water because they're made out of wood, and inside of wood you've got lots of microscopic channels, and they are designed to make water flow in one direction. After all, that's how the tree gets the water up to its leaves out of the soil. And that still works even when the tree is dead because of the way it's been designed. And so if you leave them there, you can see that some of them have started to sink and they become more and more oblique, and eventually they stand on their ends because the end that absorbs the water gets heavier first and it will start to sink. And so here we can explain to people how you can form polystrate trees. And John Mackay has been all over the world and found lots of examples of these. And so we have a mural that explains these as well. Now we do some other interesting experiments. We're very keen on looking at examples of rapid processes. So rapid processes for finding polystrate, for explaining polystrate trees. This is one that's of personal interest to John Mackay because he used to work in the coal industry and used to teach mining students about coal and has done a lot of research into it, about how buried plants get carbonized. And so we did all sorts of experiments, and it seems the key to it is clay. It forms a sort of catalyst to make buried plants carbonize. So we've buried plants in all sorts of different containers, all sorts of different plants with different clays, and we've eventually formed some black stuff. Well, how do you know that it's coal? Well, we thought, well, that's easy. You just burn some and see if it smells like a coal fire, because we're all old enough to know what a coal fire smells like. and we always let people know what we're doing and ask for comments. And some of the comments that came back is, well, you know, are you sure you've got a proper chemical test for coal? Just doing this sort of thing isn't good enough. So anyway, John contacted a chemist that he knows and said, what is the best chemical test for for seeing whether you have coal? And he wrote back and he said, well, what you do is you get a piece and you burn it and see if it smells like coal, a coal fire. So also, there's all sorts of research you can do on your own, and it works. Now, the other thing that we're well known for doing is our stalactite research. So this is our first stalactite maker. Now, all it is a big cement pipe that's been cut in half longitudinally, and we filled it up with seashells, which are a natural source of lime, and mulch, just mulch from the ground. So that will have lots of microbes and organic matter in it. And we drilled holes and put pieces of cord and then just watered it and let it drip. And sure enough, we formed these beautiful stalactites that you can see. The colour is from some of the pigments that are already in the ground there. And these all formed within months. So forget hundreds of thousands of years, right? Months will do. Now, they're not very big, but then compared to the size of the average limestone cave, we don't have much in the way there. But it's enough to make the point. Stalactite formation is not a slow, gradual crystallization process that only relies on the chemistry of calcium carbonate dissolving in water, because it's fairly insoluble. Somehow the organic matter, the microbial action, does make a difference. And secular scientists are catching up to us. There is now a whole scientific study of the microbiomes of limestone caves. So stand your ground on the biblical truth. The Bible doesn't change. Eventually the secular scientists will catch up to us. Now, when we decided we'd set up another one of these, we were going to set up the same sort of device, but then Joseph told us a good story about how he found stalactites in man-made structures, in various bridges and things like that, and leaves were being fossilized in these man-made structures. So they certainly weren't millions of years old. And in fact, being outside, well, leaves and rubbish get blown around. So we thought, well, we might emulate that. So we modified the structure a bit, and that long orange structure there is just a channel where it drips into that, and we've put leaves into it, but they blew away. But then other ones blew in, and they got stuck. And then they gradually got fossilized as this calcium carbonate structure, chemicals just stuck to the leaves, stuck to that pipeline there, all in a matter of months. So within that channel, we have fossilized leaves, and right down the bottom there, you can see we're starting to grow a little bit of a stalagmite. Right? And again, leaves just blew into that, and they got stuck, and they got fossilized. So forget about long times, forget about slow processes, right? In fact, rapid processes are what rule. It's not time that makes structures form. It's whether you've got the right conditions, the right chemical and physical processes. And of course, the other thing that we're well known for are our strata experiments. Now, these started in John's, in his front garden, where he's got an overhanging area with a freestanding concrete hard standing. And so we set up this device, which was built for us by a local builder. And it does involve a lot of mud and a lot of water, and so we didn't tend to do it during the day because it wasn't terribly conducive to people coming in and out of the office or anything to have all of this mud and water all over the place. But eventually we moved the experiment up to Jurassic Ark. So here is, we've been through goodness knows how many prototypes. I think we might be about that, up to about number 12 by now. And you might recognize the character on the right there who was helping us put this together. The other fellow there is Clem Grieger, who is a genuine rocket scientist. I'm not joking. He is an engineer. He is really brilliant. He's got all sorts of strange ideas, but he really is brilliant, and he helped us a lot in developing these experiments.
I've spent 3 hours in the car with you talking about form of energy.
Yes, that's the sort of thing you get to talk to with Clem. And, but anyway, as we've gradually worked on these experiments now, I mean, look at this. You've got mud, you've got water, you've got machinery. I mean, this is bloke's heaven, isn't it? Yes, we've. This is our current. This is the current state of the device. Clem has designed a very, very clever pump mechanism which makes the water and sediment flow through this, and you can see even from that photo there, we're starting to form some really interesting strata patterns there. Now, recording this and getting it out onto our website has been difficult simply because it is an outdoor thing, and photographing things through perspex is rather a challenge. And so we haven't really fossilized John's car there, but that is one of the challenges of actually writing up scientific research. Sometimes it can be a simple thing like finding your way around how to deflect reflections. But as you can see, in this device, we're getting all sorts of really interesting rock formations, which the evolutionists tell us take millions of years to form one by one, one thing on top of the other, whereas every time we do this experiment, we literally see them growing sideways within minutes. And you've seen this many times, Joseph. and hopefully you'll be able to come and see it again and visit Australia. This is an interesting experiment that we've been trying now. The Bible tells us that in Noah's flood, the water came from the fountains of the great deep, as well as from the water that came down from the sky. So we tried actually shooting up, spurting up fountains of the great deep. Now, they were only very, very tiny compared, but so they were hardly a great deep. But anyway, we were simulating the effect of having water coming up through the sediment. And we're getting some very interesting effects now, which conventional geology tells us, well, things got laid down and then they got shifted and moved and there were fault lines and all of this took such a long time. No, there it is happening before our eyes in minutes. And this is another experiment about rapid processes as well. We wanted to teach students how to go looking for buried things. Now, you don't just go and randomly dig holes in the ground. You have to go poking and prodding to see if there's anything that's worth burying or digging up. So we buried a whole lot of bones. They were given to us by local farmers and hunters, so they were just animal bones, and they were bleached white, just dried out bones, and we buried them. But we found that it was very interesting when they were dug up. They were left in this was just like a big sand pit, actually, on the ground with wooden surrounds. And it was just watered by the rain. We didn't water it, so any water that was in there came up from the ground or from the rain. When they dug them up, they turned brown. And each time they dug them up, after months and months, they got darker and darker. So that shows you the original bones and the coloured ones. We did send some of them to a lab in Sydney, and they said that, yes, you now have iron in these bones because we noticed they were heavy. There's iron minerals in the ground there. Sadly, the man who owns that laboratory has gone to be with the Lord. So we need to find somebody else who can do chemical analysis for us, but we know that we have iron in these bones. Now, again, we started this experiment in 2014, so the oldest these bones could be is 8 years old. So forget millions of years to mineralise a bone. 8 years in a sand pit is enough. And you can read about this experiment in the newest edition of our Tights and Mites book, Tights, Mites and Fossil Fights. New edition coming out. Hopefully we'll have it printed soon in the UK. And that's one of the new editions in that book, and you can read about those experiments. So I do hope if you ever visit Australia, you can come to Jurassic Ark and you can come and enjoy the gardens. But most of all, we want you to see the Lord's work in the real world. This is not just about creation versus evolution. This is about showing the Lord's handiwork in the world. So we do hope that you can come and enjoy with us and praise the Lord. How manifold are your works. See the many works of the Lord. You can see them all around you now in this museum and downstairs and in all of the other places where creation research is at work. And you might see, we hope that you will see the wisdom that God has made them all. The earth is full of your creatures, or full of the creation. And we hope that you will enjoy seeing that in this museum and enjoy seeing that in any other places where creation research is involved. And thank you for coming today. And we hope you've enjoyed your time here. And Joseph has some more to tell us about what's happening with this place.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's time for a break before we do the last session. Go and grab some more drinks and stuff like that. But before we do that, a couple of quick things. And before we do the couple of quick things, does anybody have any questions for Diane about what she's presented or the kind of work or the research? And a lot of these things we're hoping to duplicate, because duplication is good. It shows that you got it right the first time. So we're hoping to duplicate some of these experiments and stuff here because they are very visual. And we're praying that we can actually go out and develop more of these projects here in the research area downstairs, which hopefully was pointed out to you earlier when you did downstairs section. So there's plenty of stuff going on, plenty of stuff to work on. Does anybody have any questions for Diane?
So just to check, what does petrified mean? You said you found it like petrified wood.
Petrified wood. Well, petrified means turned to stone, basically, right, or rock. So it's wood that now looks like a rock. It is still wood, but it's now full of minerals, so it is effectively a rock. Peter, the rock in the Bible, right? So the rocks, the logs have been petrified, right, or petrified. Okay, so it's fossil wood. Yeah.
And it's different to what we were talking about earlier with the dinosaur bones, which is permineralised. So permineralised does not mean turned to stone, it means permeated with minerals, right? That's literally permeated, like permineralised. So minerals have entered the bone. That's what's been going on with those deer bones and butchered bones in the sandpit, right? It's permineralisation. The bone is still there. It's just been infilled, all the porous part has been infilled and entrapped in minerals, whether that minerals is sand or clay or mud or iron. And what's interesting is, we've got some for sale downstairs in the shop actually, we've got examples of them over here, of the sort of North Sea bones, which the main petrifying element of it is iron, that's why they're dark. And I've collected many of these North Sea bones, horse, bison, so on and so forth, up and down the Norfolk coast. I could not tell any difference between the bones that were dug up out of the sandpit and the bones, the fossil ones that you get washed up on the North Sea coast, right? That's just my experience. You go and check it and you do the tests and the iron and stuff, and you find there's no difference at all in the amounts of iron and stuff that are in these bones. So, any other questions for Diane?
Actually, it comes from that. I know that certain seals, like grey seals, common seals, on the Thames estuary, turn orange and brown because of the minerals, the ions, etc., in the mud.
Yeah.
How permanent is that?
I know because I have some. We also have lots of stuff comes out of the Thames estuary, including like butchered bones, so medieval bones that have been butchered and turned into the Thames, right? And you'll find that they have the same thing happen to them. Again, they're identical to these North Sea bones. They take on iron, they take on the browns and the staining from the mud that they're buried in, right? They are, for all the use of the word, they are fossils, right? They're preserved in minerals. It's a permanent stain. You can't give it a wash and clean it out. It is a permanent stain. It is a permanent mineralisation, right? If they were washed up on the North Sea, like we got one of our trustees, Marvin, actually donated, and I've got it downstairs in our archive. It was a sheep jawbone, right? Now, if that had been picked up on, say, West London or the Norfolk coast, you would not be able to tell the difference between that and any other of the fossils that come out of the peat beds there, right? They're identical. And to be honest, they're buried in the same way, they're preserved in the same kind of mineral. It's just happened much, much quicker than it's supposed to be. Right? We reminded people up here, if you came around up here early, that a fossil is only regarded a fossil if it's older than 10,000 years. And the only conclusion you can come as to why that is because if a fossil is older than 10,000 years, you can't trust revival, full stop. Right? So that's why they promote them as older than 10,000 years. But whether you're dealing with a petrified or a permineralised, technically, teddy bear, or whether you're dealing with a permineralised dinosaur bone, it's exactly the same process. Final question for Diane? I know I've spent most of the time talking, but... Yes.
I'm sorry to be a bit dim, but then can you say exactly what a fossil is then? If it's a flood fossil, what is that difference between the permineralisation, or is that
Well, a fossil is literally just something that you have found in a hole. The word "fos" is used in other parts of science. In fact, it's used in anatomy to describe a hole. So a fossil is just something that has been dug up. Now, in order to be dug up, that means it's been buried, and then there are different processes that can happen to it when it is buried. It can get mineralised. It can get petrified.
Oh, so whether it's petrified or permineralised?
It's still a fossil, that's right, because it's something that has been buried and then has been dug up out of a hole. And it's been preserved in some way, depending on the conditions that it's been buried in.
I think the real question was what's petrifying. Can you explain what petrifying is?
So petrifying is turned to stone. So it's, all fossils are preserved or should be preserved in stone. Some fossils, or things that are regarded as fossils, really are preserved in nothing but frozen mud. So if you look at the mammoth bones, right, they're buried in permafrost. Well, that's just frozen mud, slushy kind of stuff, right? And so they're not even technically preserved in stone. But petrification specifically means turned to stone. So in the case of fossil wood, you've got infill, so it's a type of permineralisation process. It's becoming permeated with minerals, but very little of the original wood is there, if at all, right? Now, you still do find sometimes the original wood, which is permineralised wood. Sometimes it's turned to opal, right? But, and that's very nice if you find opalised wood, but it's actually turned to stone, so it's been replaced. The cow's got a chemical change, and it's been replaced by minerals. That's whatever minerals it's been buried in, right? If you have opal forming, it's opal. If you have iron, it's there. There's lots of silica already in wood, so sometimes the silica is almost completely preserved in silica, and that's when you can polish the wood up really nicely. So petrification is turned to stone. Permineralisation is permeated with minerals. There's lots of other forms of fossilisation, right? Whether it's frozen in a permafrost, whether it's turned to iron pyrite, whether it's been replaced, so on and so forth. Sometimes it's just a cast. So a lot of the ammonites are just casts. The actual shell is sometimes the only thing that remains, and that gets broken down very easily. So you're left with an infill, which is just an infilled cast of the ammonite. So there's lots of different forms of fossilisation. Fossil, in a loosest term, just means being buried, right? Fossil is regarded nowadays as an organism or a creature from the past that has been preserved in stone. And that's basically it. All right, well, a few quick things to mention before we have our break and go and grab our teas and coffees and biscuits, and we'll reconvene back here in a little while. A couple of quick mentions and a couple of quick notes. You'll see that we have some witness T-shirts. You can witness and spread the truth of God's word just by wearing a T-shirt, and these have been proven to be excellent conversation starters. This was a concept which I sort of saw and redesigned and redid a little while, many years back, sent it over to our artist in Australia. John thought it was great. They produced these. We've been trying to get them produced in the UK ever since, and we finally got round to doing it for the open day. And Diane already mentioned that there's a number of books. There's about 3 new kids' books coming out. There's part 2 of the question and answer book. The new version of Titus and Mices are all things we want to get printed very shortly in the UK, but of course we need your support. And I know it's nowhere near Christmas, and we've still got many years before Christmas comes, but I happened to notice just the other day that there was a council worker carrying a large Merry Christmas light to put up in the middle. But anyway, with Christmas worryingly close, last year we produced a limited run of the Christmas books. They never really took off because we weren't doing much proper ministry, so it was only really promoted on Facebook and stuff. But a brand new book from John Mackay and friends. It's Zach the Star Boy, the creator who came for Christmas, from the perspective of a young Jewish boy who actually saw the star and wondered what it was all about. So a really, really great sort of comic book style, but with a really, really great message inside and a study guide at the back and stuff like that. So if you're looking for Christmas presents, the kids' books are great, and we even have a Christmas book to go specifically with it. In terms of the next section we're going to be doing after the break is looking a little bit more into the future, looking a little bit into what the vision for the Creation Research Centre is, including looking at it as a sort of facility for Christians and non-Christians, but also a way that can aid discipleship, and a bit about what that means. Somebody who I'm really excited to introduce you to is Susie. Come on, see, I know, I saw the eye roll, come on. Susie is actually coming on board to come and help us here at the Creation Research Centre. So from the new year specifically, you'll be here to help us run the open day and run the museum and get the days when we're open, look after the shop and that kind of stuff. So it's a big learning curve for both of us. But do pray for Susie and pray for us and pray for the work that's going on here in the museum as well. But Susie's our newest recruit, so really, really pleased to have you on board. You can go now. Just wanted to introduce you to everyone. All right, let's have a break, have a wander around the museum. I'll be around, Diane will be around, ask some questions. Let's grab a tea or a coffee or a biscuit, and we'll reconvene back up here for the last session. What's the time now? Nearly 3 o'clock. Let's reconvene back up here at about 3:15. So we've got sort of 20 minutes or so.
And you do realise that there is only one Holy One of Israel. You can walk down through the streets of a Middle Eastern country and say, God created, and they'll give you a pat on the back. If you walk down through the same streets and say, Jesus Christ created, things get hairy quite quickly. It really is really vitally important to determine which God we are speaking about. Because you realize when it said in the beginning God created, that word is not a name, it's a position. It tells us a bit about God. He's a mighty God. It's a plural name as well, so it's got an interesting connection to the Trinity. But it doesn't tell us who this God is. And God doesn't leave you hanging for very long, because throughout the rest of the scripture he spends his time revealing to us who he is, right? I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the Holy One of Abraham. I am the only Holy One of Israel. I am Jesus Christ, Yeshua, the one who has come to save the world, to seek and save that which is lost. So the whole purpose of this ministry, and it's vital to understand, our purpose here in this ministry, our purpose here in this museum is not to make creationists. It's here to make Christians. And it's here to disciple those who are Christians. You see, God never tells us to go out and make converts. That's the Spirit's job. He tells us to go out into the world and preach the gospel. And when people do get saved, we are to go out and make disciples, right? Preach the word constantly and make disciples. And so really what we want this ministry to be is to be able to facilitate those two things. We have had a lot of interest from the local community. We have been in local newspapers, regional newspapers. We've had a lot of people want to know what we're doing here. As I had one geologist, secular geologist, come up and said, "Why here? Why now? Why are you doing this here? Why are you doing this at this place? What made you choose this?" And we had to tell him why. We had to tell him what we're trying to do. He wasn't too happy about it, but we had to tell him what we were doing here. The local response has been mostly popular, which is great. That's what we want. But we want to make sure that anybody who comes in gets the message of the gospel, that they understand what we're actually here for. We're here to spread the gospel, and we're here to create disciples, as well as be able to have the shop and produce resources and sell fossils and all things that are exciting no matter what you believe. But they're exciting, and we want to make sure that we get the gospel across to people. Well, a little bit of the background to this museum project. John kind of introduced a bit of it, and obviously, as you know from Diane's presentation, this has been a long-term thing. Museums have been going on in and around creation research for a very long time. The last big update we did was in 2019. We had a big tour with John Mackay, and we were promoting the idea of developing a museum project. That's the last time it was really a public front. Obviously, something relatively serious happened in between then. We had COVID, or even more serious than COVID was the lockdown. And we were very limited in where we could go, what we could do, so we turned to the online world, and that was very successful, and we've mentioned a few bits about that, and we'll mention a bit more about that as we're going. But the real question is, where have we been? Where are we going? How can you help? Well, this is where it all started. Do you remember the picture I started with? Very young me, slightly younger John Mackay, back in 2014. And we started by filling the family home, or a particular part of the family home, this extension, full of fossils. And it developed on from there, and this was the name we gave it, and this was where we ended up. It was pretty full. We had quite a number of fossils, a few thousand fossils actually on display. We had many more stacked up in boxes in the garden shed, or 3 garden sheds rather, floor to ceiling. We ran out of room. And John had been visiting the UK for 30 odd years by this point, and so we had box loads of fossils in a church in Manchester, we had box loads of fossils in Scotland, we had box loads of fossils all over the place, just sitting there not doing anything. We wanted to get these on display. It's been a long time passion, dream, vision of both John and mine to actually get a museum up and running and in place. And it wasn't just fossils like this. You can see some of the fossils, you may even recognize some of them that are on display here today, but we had living animals as well. I worked for 6 years as a zookeeper, and we ended up taking on a lot of rescue animals in pretty poor condition and pretty dire straits, and so we ended up looking after them and trying to, do the best that we could to them, and some of them ended up being brought back home. And the idea is to have a museum ministry which also facilitates live animals, almost like a mini creation zoo. And they're fascinating creatures, and I love the reptiles, the amphibians, and the invertebrates. I think they're wonderful creatures. But they do help to answer questions like, why would a good God make bad things? I mean, you do realise poison dart frogs. Why would God make something like poison dart frogs? Well, the reality is in captivity they're not poisonous, because you don't feed them the creatures that are or create the toxin. And of course, in a good world, they wouldn't have eaten the toxic creatures in the first place to secrete the toxin out of their skin. And you can talk about venom and look at venomous examples of venomous creatures that are completely vegetarian. What are they doing with venom? Well, it turns out exactly what every venomous creature does with their venom. They digest. They're not actually designed to kill. They're designed to digest. It just so happens that if it injects you with digestive fluid and it starts digesting you, you're not going to survive for very long. But it's designed to digest. And so this is all coming from this future vision of wanting to be able to do this and produce this. And this museum, the family home, if you like, was actually based in Norfolk. So a bit out of the way. The problem with Norfolk is you have to be on the way to, you don't pass through it, right? Get to Norfolk and then you reach the sea. So we wanted somewhere a bit more central. And we wanted to be able to facilitate a network of museums around the country. Not just one huge one, and this is a pretty big one, but we wanted a central one that could facilitate lots of smaller museums that spread out around the country as we continue to move forward with this project, and have smaller churches or groups of churches look after smaller displays, have mini creation research centers, discovery centers, have a set of resources, help facilitate that discipleship and evangelism. So just down the road from here in Western Ring is the Quinta Sunday School. Some people will have heard of the Quinta Estate. It's quite a big Christian conference centre. And the church connected to the Quinta Sunday School have been absolutely fabulous. They've been staunch supporters of the ministry and what we've been doing. In fact, many of them are here today and have helped us abundantly with the production of this museum. Unfortunately, there was some issues and some hidden politics that neither us nor the church realised were actually there, and it was nothing to do with the church. But we did spend about 2 years in this building actually developing exhibits. We ended up having some of them on display. We ended up taking some people round, but it was never a permanent place. It was never a place that we could end up opening fully to members of the public. It was never a place that we could fully take on the vision of creating a research site. It was never a place that we could actually use for conferences and for interns and for discussions and stuff like that. So although we put a lot of stuff on display, and although we spent a lot of time and effort actually building this up, it ended up basically early this year coming to the realization that we needed a new place. We needed a new location, and we didn't know where we were going to go. We didn't know what it was going to be. We'd been given a deadline as to when we had to move out, and we really had no place to know what we were going to do or where we were going to go. And it was actually, this was one of the buildings that we were looking at around here, and we came up here and it ended up being taken on by another person, by a lease. And we carried on looking, and it was actually my wife who ended up checking the place again, and it still hadn't been taken. So he called them up, and it turned out that it had fallen through. And so we went to have a look, and I just remember the first time I walked into this building and had a walk around. I'll just show you some pictures of what it looked like. There's the outside originally. Now, eventually, this will have a big creation research sign, dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff. But it was an old fireplace showroom. If you want to know a bit of the history about the building and a funny, originally, as far as we can find out, it used to be a cinema. And then it closed down being a cinema in 1939. And a clause was added onto the building because the cinema moved to where the current cinema was until it also closed down a few years back, and they didn't want competition. So they got a council clause put on the building in 1939 that said under no circumstances were there ever to be any moving pictures in the building. That clause remained on there until 2022 when our solicitors picked up on that and said, you might want to change that because by the strictest definition, you wouldn't even be allowed to walk in with your mobile phone, right? Because it's a moving picture. So we managed to get that removed, praise the Lord. But you can see it then became a place where, at one point it was a place where you came and paid your bills and stuff like that, and then eventually became a fireplace showroom, which it remained until the beginning of 2020 when the shop was closed because of COVID, and then the owner decided it was time to retire and not open up again. So we ended up taking it on. And these are some of the pictures that it looked like in the beginning. We've obviously removed a lot of the fake walls and we've redone. This is upstairs around all these pillars. You can see these big, huge square box things, and we had a great time moving everything in, and we had to get out of the previous building, the Quincy Sunday School, and into here, and over a period of about 3 days we had an amazing team of people step up to help us shift everything into this building. It was absolutely fabulous. We got it in here and dumped, and I have to admit I started this week looking at this dumped volume of stuff going, how on earth are we going to get to an open day in a week's time? And here we are. And so I am extremely grateful for another set of volunteers, many of them from the first lot, but lots of additional volunteers who stepped up and have come and helped us actually get this ready. It really is it is a dream coming to realization. I mean, we've renovated, that's what the kitchen looked like. The roof was falling in when we got it. And my brother, who renovates houses and all sorts of stuff, has done it all up. We've got offices, as you've seen upstairs, near where the toilets are. We've really got everything that you could possibly want to be able to bring all of this together. And we're really looking forward to see where God takes this in the future. We have plans of taking on interns, people who can come and work with the museum, people who can provide help to us, but also we give them training programs. They learn how to not only clean fossils and do experiments, but they learn how to study God's word. They learn how to understand how to read the Bible, how to study the Bible for teaching, which is something that's vital, whether you're, male, female, whether God's calling you into a teaching ministry or not. It's something that is vitally important to understand good hermeneutics, how to study the Bible, how to comprehend what the Word of God is saying, even if it's just for personal, or whether it's to teach your children, or whether it's for older ladies to teach younger ladies, or whether it's for men to teach their sons or their brothers in Christ. It's something that's vital to understand, and we want to be able to facilitate that. We want to be able to facilitate research so we can continue developing projects like they have done at Jurassic Ark in Australia, so we can duplicate them because they're so brilliantly visual. In fact, most of the experiments, Diane, they're designed to be able to be done and observed by people coming to see it. Many of these, like the strata experiments, takes about 5 minutes to run through. Right? You can stand and watch this rock form. The experiments like coal and stuff, you can see it happening in front of your eyes. It only takes a few weeks to produce coal. And so all this kind of stuff really needs to be done here in the UK, but it needs to have the ability to be able to go further, to be able to develop these projects going forward. And that's something which we want the building to be able to do. Excuse me. And the dream really is to create a centre which is, as we said, it's there for evangelism and discipleship. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And yes, the creation message is a key thing to that. Yes, the displays, yes, the hands-on, yes, the facilities for those who home educate, for instance. It's there as a facility for them, but ultimately it's a place of evangelism and discipleship. So, how to support? Well, we've done the big move. That's been great. We got everything in. But there's plenty more to go forwards. Obviously, there's the ongoing costs of having a building, the rent, maintenance, renovating stuff. It's been extremely costly. Even things like your business rates and stuff like that. We've got small business relief, which is great. one of the good things that's come out of COVID. But it still is extremely expensive to be able to maintain a building like this. So that's where the trust comes in. The Creation Research Trust, who is committed to supporting the ministry and financing this stuff. So if you want to support the ministry, support the trust. It's a tax-efficient way, registered charity in the UK, able to support the work of us, able to support the work of Creation Research, support the work of the museum project. So that's one way of supporting us. Of course, you can also donate directly to Creation Research on our websites, or you can see Susie downstairs who's looking after the shop. But it's not just having the building itself and maintaining and renovating it. Eventually, we want to get to the point, just because I will collapse if not, we want to get to the point where the museum is self-sustaining, in the sense that I don't have to be there, or a volunteer doesn't have to be there to take you around the exhibits. The idea is we use some of the technology, like the 3D imaging, like the virtual reality stuff, which can be used to create a museum experience like no other, where, unlike most museums, you can come up and touch and feel and get up close and personal to the things, but also you can scan codes and scan pictures on your phone, and things come to life and videos pop up and we tell you about it, almost like you're getting a personal tour, but I don't have to be there every time, right? Although I will be based in here a lot. And the one idea for this part here, we're thinking we're probably going to keep this the office structure. Oops. Because what I would like to try and do is turn it into, like, an explorer's hut, where people can come up and have fossils laid out on the counter, so you can have that chance to come up and touch and feel and really get connected with the real world. And as Diane says, God is the God of the real world. So we want that connection. UK ministry is one of the big ways of supporting, traveling around and actually doing ministry, speaking at churches, speaking at events, doing conventions and stuff like that. We've just come off the back of a fantastic convention, the first one we've tried to do. We want to try and do it again. I know there are people here who've been to the convention, so you can speak to them and see what they thought about it. But we really want to try and get this to be something which is a regular occurrence. Something that we can do where we take people actually out into the real world. We go and dig up fossils together. It was 5 days of digging up fossils, doing workshops, seminars in the evening. It was a fantastic time. So we do need bookings. If you or your local church or local organisation was to book Creation Research, get in touch and do that now. And we also need skilled helpers, not just actually for the website work and the database and actually developing all of this, but also skilled workers, people who are, for instance, electricians, who can come and look over the electrics for us and help us if we need to redo some things. People who are, I mean, if anybody knows anything about heating, we tried to get the boiler working yesterday. We managed to get the heating on. That was great. The hot water works sometimes, and other times it doesn't. And we don't really know what we're doing. But also we don't really want to spend the minimum of about £200 to get a boiler engineer out if he's going to go, oh, there you are, press that button, it's fixed. So if you know anyone, by the way, send them to us. Or if you know anything about it yourself, have a look at the boiler for us. But skilled engineers, people who, I mean, this was obviously a gas fireplace before, so there's gas pipes everywhere. Many of them are disconnected. Some of them aren't. Some of them need taken out. Some of them need leaving in there. But skilled workers, you're providing a valuable asset to the ministry. You're providing a valuable donation to the ministry just by coming and helping us with your skilled workers. Obviously, website work, database, developing graphic design, all this kind of stuff is stuff that is needed moving forward. So if you know anybody or you have it yourself, then you do get in touch. Here's a few websites just to finish before we move on to Sam's little section. CreationResearchCentre.com is our museum website. It needs an overhaul. We want to have a database of fossils and pictures of fossils and events and all sorts of stuff. It's got some good content on there already, but there's a lot of dud links. There's a lot of work that needs doing to it, so we need helpers who know about websites and can help us take photos, even just going through stuff, taking photos, making notes as I'm talking, writing stuff up, publishing stuff. All this stuff is stuff that is so vital. Creation Research UK is the ministry. We're in the minute of transferring redeveloping the way that the UK ministry runs on a legal basis. So that will be developed. We can take people on like Susie, who's coming to work with us. And creationresearch.net is the main site, which takes you links to research, all stuff around the world, Jurassic Ark, the Q&A site, all of that. So check out those, get behind us and support us in any way that you can. Obviously, there are books and DVDs and stuff for sale downstairs, and some of these books and DVDs are getting quite old. Some of them, as you know, just on the bargain shelf. Content's great, but some of them are just a little bit old and sort of not, well, they're out of date with the imaging anyway. So, excuse me. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last few weeks is we've been doing some stuff with Diane. We've almost finished filming our entire series of Round the Museum with Joe and Diane, where we take you around and talk about specific things. We've got about 3 or 4 more episodes we'd like to film before Diane heads off to London and then back to Australia. We did a whole interview set. We're doing a good to bad to worse program, looking at things like venoms and poisons and toxins and why would a good God make this and make an entire documentary out of this. And there's one little program which we've been working on for the last few months, really. There's been a lot of stuff needing to wrestle out and sort out. It's been more controversial than you might see. But it's known as the Genesis Project. I'm just going to show you a little bit of a film here from Sam Jenkyns, who's come on board to help us, looks after stuff, and also talks about creation conversations and things like that. So just enjoy this little segment of Sam speaking and giving you a bit of a rundown, bit of a background to some of these exciting projects, including a little trailer at the end, if my thing decides that it wants to actually work, which at the moment it doesn't seem to want to.
Hello everyone and welcome to the open day. I hope you've had a great day so far. Thank you so much for coming. It really does mean a lot to our ministry, and thank you for showing an interest in the work that we're doing. A little bit of an introduction from me first. My name is Sam Jenkyns. I am the head of media, technology and photography at Creation Research UK. Just sort of some of the things that I do. So I operate the live stream, Creation Conversations, on a Friday. If you have come from Creation Conversations, you've heard about the open day, so welcome to you. You are very welcome. Thank you so much. Your support means a lot to us. If you haven't heard of Creation Conversations, our weekly live stream, you can tune in on Fridays, that's British time, at 9 p.m. What you can do is you can enter in messages in the chat, you can chat to us, you can ask us questions. It's a really great place to grow your knowledge and to really delve in deep into some really tricky topics. And what we aim to do is to help explain them in a way that's really easy to understand. On my side, I help operate all of that. I help make people's slideshows get bigger. I help people get their cameras working, their issues with PowerPoint, usually with John. So you've probably seen me do a few bits and pieces like that on the live stream. And I also interact with you guys on the chat. If you're watching and you send a message and you get a message back from Creation Research, that's me. So I'm replying to all the messages, putting them up on the screen. If you've got any questions, I curate them, collect them, put them in a little folder, and then I can throw them up on the screen for you guys to see. And so all the guys on the chat can actually, on the live stream chat, can see it. So this is just a little bit of an introduction to the Genesis project. So this is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I believe this is something that God has placed on my heart, and I can't speak for the others who are here today, but I'm sure they will reiterate that this is on their hearts as well. The first question is, how did the first idea come about? So the first idea originated in around about July of last year. So I was getting involved with Creation Research. I met up with Joe, met up at Costa around the corner from where I live. He'd just gone to pick up a van to take down to Creation Fest that year. And we just got chatting, and I mentioned this idea that I felt like God had placed on my heart, and Joe liked the idea. So I came up with sort of a proof of concept, and it just sort of blossomed from there, really. It's been a lot of work, a lot of hard work, a lot of long nights, but we've gotten to a place now where we're starting to get a lot more comfortable with what it's going to be, what it'll look like, and how it'll flow. And I think we are at the place now where we want it to be. And so we're really excited to show it to you. It's nowhere near ready yet, but we'll get onto that in a little bit later on. So another question that we commonly get is, what's our aim for the project? So the aim for the project is to make Genesis accessible. The original dream was to do the visual representation of Genesis, chapter 1 and the beginning part of chapter 2. And it was just to basically visually explain Genesis. So this would be the film would be perfect if you're really struggling with getting your head around some of the things that happen in Genesis. You want a visual sort of representation. This would be perfect for you. And also as well, our aim is to educate, really. So part of this project has sort of blossomed into something bigger. It's grown in scope, much to my surprise. I thought it was just going to be a little side project that I'd be doing, and that would be that, but it's turned into so much more than I could even possibly have imagined it could be, to which I am very grateful to God for. The next question we commonly get is, will it be free? Yes and no. The best way I can explain this is the original concept and idea was that we would make this short film. It was going to be around about 11-12 minutes long, and we put it out for free on YouTube, and we would have it as a really eye-catching sort of channel trailer and resource that we could recommend to people who are interested in our ministry, interested in the Bible, interested in studying these things, and they just want to sort of get their head around it, or even a new Christian. That was the aim, really. And we loved the idea. We thought it was great. It was massive outreach potential for it being free on YouTube. And now what has happened is it's grown in scope. So what we're doing is we're expanding it massively. And we're going to have 3 versions. We're having 3 versions. So there will be short versions, which will be each day. So it'll be, if you've ever seen the Is Genesis History YouTube channel, they put out these little clips, and they put them out, and it's like its own enclosed topic. It's like sort of like a 3 to 5 minute video. And that's probably what this is going to be. The short clips will be each day. So it'll be day 1, day 2, blah, 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 blah. The second half of that is the entirety of it. So the dream is still alive and it is still going ahead. That the days of creation in a visual form will be free. We have felt that is what God has placed on our heart to do. So we're going to honour that. So the unedited cinematography, cinematic thing. Words are escaping me. But the visual aspect of it, the movie, the long cut, will be free. So that will be unedited from day 1 to day 7. It's just going to be that. It's just to be the creation week, one day after another. And then we come on to the next bit. So this is where the project has grown in scope. We want to turn it into a documentary, a feature-length documentary. The aim is to get it to around about an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. We'll have to see if that's the case. But what we're planning on doing is doing something that we haven't really done before. So what we want to do is we want to have a project where we can break up the days and do a little bit of a deep dive into the textual side of Genesis, as opposed to the evidence side. Don't get me wrong, there will be evidence in there. There will be the classic creation research stuff in there. Taking you down to a cliffside and showing you something really interesting that will be key to a day. but a lot of documentaries focus purely on the science, and we don't want to do that. We want to have a well-rounded film for people to enjoy, that it would be a great resource for you, to help you with your studies, to help you learn and develop. And so that's basically what it's going to be. That will be paid. That will be a way of you helping our ministry, and it'll be a full release. We're possibly, well, we're in discussions internally of potentially even doing a Blu-ray release. Who knows, might be a limited edition. We'll have to look at costs and things like that, but that's the aim. We want to have a special edition, perhaps even just a standard edition, just on DVD. We don't know. Maybe even have a digital only HD version. The possibilities are endless, really, with this. So time will tell what we want to do. We welcome suggestions as well from you guys. If you want to pull Joe aside and have a chin wag with him about some potential ideas you may have for the Genesis project, then feel free. We always welcome new, fresh ideas. What technology are we using to bring this to life? So we're using a whole host of different technology that wasn't previously available. Part of me coming on to Creation Research is to really sort of push the ministry into 21st century, up to date and very modern. So part of that has been the logo redesign, which I'm sure you've probably seen at some point today, and you'll see it at the beginning of something later. But that's just part of it. So another part is the live streams. They were 30 minutes, believe it or not, back in when they first were getting started. And I came on board and said, you know what, YouTube doesn't work that way. You're going to have to work hard, and we're going to have to do at least an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hour streams per week. And that's the only way we're going to get traction, because that's just the way YouTube works. And since we started doing that, the YouTube channel has grown. It's growing in subscribers, it's growing in donations as well. We've got the access to the donations on YouTube, which is a massive benefit to the ministry. It's another form of revenue that we didn't have before, so that's always a great help. The main sort of technology we're using is Unreal Engine 5. So that is a free technology that's put out by a company called Epic Games. It's typically used for video game development. However, it has massive potential to use in films. If you have ever seen The Mandalorian on Disney, you may have done. There might be some big Star Wars nerds in the audience, I don't know. But Unreal Engine is used in that for the backgrounds. It's very clever technology, integrates seamlessly with the camera. It's high tech, and also the main thing about it is that it uses some technology that's called Lumen and Nanite. They basically enable things to look photoreal. So it's got ultra realistic lighting, and it's got ultra realistic 3D models that we can use in the project to actually get the best possible visuals for this film. Another technology that we're using is Hollywood grade editing software. It's called DaVinci Resolve. This has been used to edit films such as Hereditary, Godzilla King of the Monsters, of which I'm a huge fan, but massive Hollywood blockbusters. The color grading is so in depth, and it gets you some beautiful colors, which we want to use to bring out the vibrancy and the joy in Genesis. And it's super agile, very flexible, and it's great to use. I know it very well, and we're using it to the best of our ability to give you the best possible product. Another commonly asked question: will there be dinosaurs? Well, it's not a creation research project without dinosaurs. Come on, yes, there will be dinosaurs. You will see something in a little bit where you might get a sneak peek of something. How far are we through the project? There's more work to be done. We need to get a whole host of interviews filmed. And fortunately that costs money, plane tickets, we've got to have time out of our schedules to do it. We've got to actually edit it together. There's a whole host of things that we need to sort of take into account, but we're aiming to get this done as soon as we possibly can. When's it coming out? When it's ready. There's no rushing this project. We want to make it absolutely pinpoint precise to the T. We want to make this the best possible film we can do for the glory of God's kingdom. Another question that we get is, how can I help with this project? Is there anything you need? Well, that's very... it's a difficult question to answer. There are multiple things that we need. Money for plane tickets to actually film in-person interviews with our cameras. We don't want to film an interview over video software like Zoom or Teams. We don't want to do that. It doesn't look great. It's not professional. We want to make this the best possible thing we can do. So we want to do things in person as much as we possibly can, which would be it's going to be expensive, but every little bit helps. There are things that we need in terms of a technological side. Needs as and when we need them will make people aware. If people can pray for it, if we've got to provide the resources, fantastic, please do so. Or get in touch with us and ask if there's something we need. Is there anything the ministry needs? We're always there's always a cost somewhere. There's always something unexpected that's cropped up. So your support is greatly needed. We put out a trailer a few weeks ago now, and it's just basically a sneak peek, a teaser, really. The first trailer we ever put out was on Standing for Truth on their YouTube channel. That is an exclusive trailer we did with them because we're partnering up with them for the film to help get the film out to as many people as possible. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to play the trailer for the Genesis film, and I hope you enjoy it. I want to thank you for coming out. It really does mean a lot to the ministry and to me as well, even though I'm not there. I know, such a shame. But thank you so much. It really does mean a lot to us, and enjoy the trailer. So that was the trailer. What did you think? I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about the project, if you want to help in any way, if you want to find out a bit more, you can speak to Joe or Diane. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer any questions they can. If not, they can probably forward them on to me. If it's more of a technological question, they can forward that on to me, and we can answer that on Creation Conversations, or even put it in a newsletter or something like that. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. God bless you, and I'll see you on Creation Conversations. Bye bye.
Sam is great, and one of the reasons why he's particularly useful for us is not just because he's great with the media and the technology and all of that kind of stuff, but also because he brings a, shall we say, a layman's perspective to things like Creation Conversations, and also it gives us an opportunity to teach him in order to help us teach other people. So remember we were talking earlier about the good to bad to worse table. Well, one of the first drafts of Sam's Genesis project that he showed us had stinging nettles in the Garden of Eden. Now most people have never thought about this. Most people are just completely unaware of this concept of good to bad to worse and what a good world actually meant. And so many people are so caught up in the idea of evolution, the idea of secular timescales, and sometimes it's really difficult to work out where the indoctrination comes in. I mean, I picked up my books about stars, and I knew the first page about the Big Bang was all wrong. But halfway through, I opened up the book, and it said about how stars were born, and how big clouds of nebula could become condensed down and end up turning into stars. And I didn't know that that's a scientific impossibility. And I didn't know that that is just something which is promoted because, well, if the universe has been here for 14.5 billion years, the stars must have come from somewhere. So they must have been able to be born. So it's sometimes hard to divide what is fact and fiction, what is reality and what is just pure interpretation. And Sam is useful for us because, having been involved in creation research for a long time, and Diane even longer than me, and John obviously even longer than both of us, you do get into a certain mindset, you do start to see things in a certain way, God's way, right? As it says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, let this mind be in you that is also in Christ. That's what we're trying to do, that's what we're trying to promote. So by actually working through this project with Sam, and having to correct him fairly often, but that's good, and having to have discussions and Bible studies with him, and work through that kind of stuff about getting this big perspective, it really helps us to help develop projects here at the museum and going forward and stuff like that. And one of the things that Sam said, remember he said, yes, okay, we're going to be dealing with the evidence, but we also want to deal with the biblical authority. We want to deal with the timeline. We want to deal with the Bible. We want to deal with that element, that aspect of the of scripture in the documentary. One of the things that he's talking about is this rock here. This is collected from Scotland. It's called Trinidadian sandstone. And Trinidadian sandstone is interesting because it is found in one form or another across huge amounts of the world's surface. It's very, very thick. It's found at the lowest levels of sedimentary rock all around the world. It is clearly laid down by water. You can see all the rounded pebbles. It's a sandstone. And it has no fossils in it at all. When was this created? Well, the question we like to ask people, again, is how many times was the earth fully covered in water? Most people say once, but no, it doesn't. Phil's got it twice. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. The earth was created covered in water. And it says that God caused the land to come out of the sea, and the sea to be gathered in one place, and the dry land appeared. They realised this would take tectonic forces beyond anything that we can see today, and it would produce two things: an enormous amount of erosion an enormous amount of deposition. So don't be surprised you have enormous water-based sandstone deposits. Sandstone, by the way, is just a description of the size of particles. Right? Sand is ground up granite and rock. So don't be surprised that you have evidence of a pre-flood event globally which produced layers and layers, which is completely absent of fossils, because you have rocks that were formed on day 3 of creation that weren't fully destroyed during the flood, which was the second time that the earth was fully covered in water. And of course, at this point, there were plenty of animals waiting to be caught up, buried, fossilised, and so on and so forth. So when you come and touch a rock like this, you're actually touching the rock that was formed on day 3 of creation. So pretty exciting stuff. And part of what we want to do is actually go to these places and film these. Do not just standing up and talking, but actually go and film this kind of stuff and put it out there. But specifically look at the biblical point of day 1, 2, 3. And if you want a really great book, another thing that we're producing, we sold out of it in the UK, and I'm hoping to get more for it here, but it's Walking with Jesus through Genesis, or Walking through Genesis with Jesus. It's one of the two. But it's basically a Bible study going through days 1 to 3, an entire book, just days 1 to 3. Looking at the connections between Genesis and the Gospel, between Genesis and the book of John, between what Jesus did in the beginning, to what he did when he became flesh and walked among us, to what he's going to do when he returns again. So once it's published, I highly recommend it's going to be reprinted rather. And version 2, I believe, is coming out as well, Diane, soon. I know that we've been working on that in Australia, so that's a really great plan. That's basically what we'll build this Genesis documentary off. It's moved on a long way from what Sam was first thinking about when he began to put these ideas down. So we're really pushing forward with this and hoping that we'll be able to get it out. Amongst other things, we've got lots of other documentaries in production that we want to try and replace. Lord willing, I'll be going with Sarah Ann to Australia next year, which is what I was due to do in 2020 and didn't for obvious reasons. And Australia has just opened back up again, so we're going to hopefully, Lord willing, go out there. And I'm taking Sarah Ann specifically because she has a media background, a filmmaking background, and so we want to take her out to be able to actually refilm some of these documentaries that were produced like 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, some of them, and be able to redo some of these things. So do pray for us, continue to support us. This ministry goes much beyond what is just here in the museum. So I think we should bring it to a close. It's about 4 o'clock. So let's bring the open day officially to a close, but we will be around for a lot longer. So if anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to discuss how they can support, whether it's practically, financially, or any of those things, if people want to have just more time walking around and looking at the displays and asking questions, I'll be around, Diane will be around. I'm sure Josh will be around as well, so you can ask us questions and discuss about these things and check out the bookstore. And if you have questions about where we see the future and what we want to try and develop in the future, then we will be around to do that as well. But remember the trust forms. The Creation Research Trust is the best way to support us financially, but there's also options of check, credit card, all that. The same thing. And there's ability, if you donate online, it comes directly through to us, so we're able to support the day-to-day running of the museum. But if you want to support the museum big time, Creation Research Trust is the place to go and support. So I think we'll bring it to a close there, and I think it would be wise to do that with a word of prayer. So let's all close in prayer. But I'll be around for a lot longer, and I know Diane and the rest of the team will. And a huge thank you as well to all those people who've helped us get to this point. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for today, Lord. We thank you for the open day, the first one of many, we pray. We thank you for this ministry that you've called so many people to and have helped us sustain over the past few years, Lord, and in the past few months in particular. We thank you for everybody who's come and shown their support today, who's come and seen the museum and seen the potential that this place has. And Lord, we just pray that you would continue to bless all of us here. We pray for the museum project. We pray for safe journey home this evening. We thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen. Catch you later, and catch you now. We'll be around for a while.